Hey, what's up, movie fans? It's your lovable anti-hero guy, Deadpool. Hey, guess what? I finally got my own movie. Sure, it took like over a freaking decade for Fox to greenlit this baby, but who's counting? And no, I didn't show up in that X-Men Origins Wolverine movie. I mean, I don't know who the guy in that movie that sounds and looks like me is. Shh, we're pretending that that movie does exist. Anyway, this chick here is going to be reviewing my film. But let me squeeze in a few words here before she does her thing. Get ready, because this movie is going to be epic on a big mother... Quiet, Deadpool. Let a real reviewer get a say on your film. Ahem. Anyway, on with the review. Caution. The following video is an in-depth review of the movie I'm currently reviewing, which means that there will be massive spoilers in the review. If you haven't seen this movie yet, then please feel free to watch this movie first before watching this video. However, if you have already seen this movie, or you just want to know my thoughts on this movie, then keep watching. Before this movie came out, I was never familiar with the character of Deadpool. Sure, I've seen Deadpool make sporadic appearances in the media, such as the Marvel vs. Capcom video game series, and the Hulk vs. Wolverine animated film. And gasp, shock, I even saw Deadpool in that disaster of a film, X-Men Origins Wolverine. But despite the fact that Deadpool made appearances in those movies and video games, we never really got to know anything about Deadpool's background and how he became the way he is. At the time, the only thing I knew about Deadpool was that he was known as the Merc with the mouth, and that he had a strange tendency to break the fourth wall when it suits him. And don't get me started on what they did to him in X-Men Origins Wolverine. I mean, is that really Deadpool? I might not have known much about Deadpool at the time, but even I knew that the Deadpool in that film wasn't the real Deadpool. The Deadpool that I knew of at the time had worn a red and black costume and was always seen with a mask on. I don't know if the film went in that direction because they wanted to try something different with the character and they just took an extreme approach to it, but judging by the negative reaction from the audience, especially if you're a Deadpool fan, I guess that it didn't turn out very well. Because of the failure of X-Men Origins Wolverine, it was unknown at the time if Deadpool would ever get his own film. Enter 2016 and things started changing for Deadpool as he finally got his own semi-origin film, which changed the landscape for superhero films at large. If you were to ask me years ago if it was possible for an R-rated superhero film to be successful, I would have said no. But this movie has proven to me that R-rated superhero films can be just as successful as PG-13 ones as long as it's with the right characters, which I go into more depth with later on. So before I get into what I liked and hated about this film, I would like to give out a brief summary of this film. The film starts off with Wade Wilson telling the audience about how his life was like before he became Deadpool. Well, technically the film started off with Deadpool fighting off a lot of mooks on a highway, but that's not important right now. Anyway, Wade Wilson was a former Special Forces operative who was discharged and he decided to become a mercenary as a result. During this time, Wade ends up meeting a beautiful stripper named Vanessa, and the two automatically hit it off with each other. As they spend more time with each other, Wade eventually proposes to Vanessa, and Vanessa ended up accepting the proposal. But unfortunately, after Wade proposes to Vanessa, he ends up contracting cancer, and he starts worrying about how this will affect his relationship with Vanessa. It was then that a mysterious man, who Wade dubs Agent Smith, approaches Wade and tells him that there is a program that Wade can get into that will help him cure of his cancer. Wade accepts this offer and he ends up going to the program without telling Vanessa about it. It turns out that said program was a place, possibly Weapon X, where various people are being experimented on to become super soldiers and then be sold into the market as weapons of mass destruction. It was there that Wade ends up meeting a cruel man named Ajax, who runs the facility, and he ends up transforming Wade into a humanoid abomination who is able to heal from any wound, but ends up having disfigured skin in the process. Because of this, Wade is afraid to approach Vanessa for fear of her rejecting him because of his appearance. It was then that Wade decided to go after Ajax and force him to change it back into his normal self while becoming Deadpool in the process. Now, when I first heard about this film, I admit that I wasn't interested in seeing this film. I had mentioned earlier that I didn't know anything about Deadpool before watching this film, nor was I that interested in the character. Despite the fact that he is supposed to be one of the funniest superheroes or anti-heroes ever created. It wasn't until they mentioned that Colossus, you know, the big Russian guy who could transform his skin into steel and is a member of the X-Men, was going to be in this film. That actually piqued my curiosity since I never would have thought that Colossus of all characters was going to be in a Deadpool film. So I actually sat down and watched this film, and I immediately fell in love with it. I never would have thought that I would enjoy this movie as much as I did, since for one thing, I'm not the biggest Deadpool fan, and the other, this movie was filled to the brim with violence, strong language, and some nudity. But somehow this movie managed to convince the audience that having lots of violence, nudity, and strong language was actually necessary to the characters and plot at hand. The themes in this movie are spread out in an interesting way. Normally I've explained about the themes of a movie in just 1 or 2 paragraphs, depending on how many themes the movie has, but in this case, the themes of the movie, true love, self-worth, vengeance, and what it means to be a hero, are shown through the characters themselves. So to have a clear understanding of the themes that are being explored in this movie, I would have to talk about each character in the film and how the themes relate to them. Deadpool was one of the most interesting and fully realized characters in this film. I never would have thought that we would get a more accurate portrayal of the character on the big screen, especially after the treatment he got in X-Men Origins Wolverine. However, I will say that we kinda got a watered down version of the character in this film compared to the comics. The Deadpool from the comics was portrayed as being usually immoral and very violent, although it really depends on the writer. Here, even though Deadpool is still a pretty violent character, especially during the scenes where he mows down Ajax goons in order to find Ajax, he is portrayed in a much more sympathetic light. His most defining character trait in this movie is his love for Vanessa, and how all of the events that happen in this movie revolves around what he's willing to do for Vanessa. I really love the relationship between Vanessa and Wade, as their love for each other felt so genuine, and I especially love the silly banter that they have with each other. Probably the scene that best shows just how genuine their relationship with each other really is was the scene where Wade was diagnosed with cancer and Vanessa is still willing to stay with Wade to help him during his crisis. Deadpool's personality was the highlight of this film, as he is shown as being, of course, foul-mouthed, hilarious, and violent, but he also has more depth to his personality. I found it pretty interesting that Wade Wilson is shown as being very cynical in this film. It seems like the moment that he got discharged from the Special Forces, his worldview had completely changed, and he becomes convinced that he can never be a hero. I'm actually pretty curious about why Wade has such a cynical view on being a hero. Did something happen to him while he was in the Special Forces? Like, did he fail to save someone he cared about? Or did being discharged from the forces hurt his pride, and he didn't want to go through that experience again? Or maybe he just found the idea of being a hero boring and decided to go into the mercenary business for more excitement in his life. Who knows? The movie never really explored Wade's backstory before he became a mercenary and how he turned his back on being a hero in the first place. I would have liked it better if the movie had at least taken the time to explore that part of Wade's life. But on the other hand, I can kind of understand about why that part of Wade's life is not quite important to the main story being told here. The main story being told here is Wade ended up in a program, probably Weapon X, the movie never really stated what facility Wade went to, that was supposed to cure him of his cancer. But unfortunately, Wade ends up being tortured at the facility, and the resulting experiments ended up scarring his skin, but giving him immense healing factors in the process. I was amazed at how seriously I took Deadpool throughout the entire movie. Deadpool is one of those characters who is constantly acting like a clown, whether it be through him breaking the fourth wall or making jokes at other people's expenses. So of course, when I first watched this film, I was thinking to myself about how I would ever take this character seriously. But when the dramatic parts of the movie started to show up, I was pleasantly surprised with the fact that I took Deadpool's dilemma so seriously. The scenes where Wade was being tortured in the facility were downright terrifying, and I really felt worried for Wade during this situation and hoped that he made it out of there alive. Although since Deadpool is basically narrating the story from the very beginning, it's already a foregone conclusion that Wade would make it out alive. I also felt bad for Wade when he couldn't approach Vanessa because of both fearing for her life if Ajax found her, and because he was afraid of how Vanessa would react if she sees his disfigured body. These moments made me feel very sympathetic towards Deadpool's situation. If Deadpool was very cynical before, then these moments pretty much reinforce his cynical views on the world. Deadpool went through so much trauma in this film that I was actually surprised that he still maintained a humorous personality despite everything that happened to him. I probably would have broken down completely if I went through the same situations that Deadpool went through, although I probably wouldn't have survived what he went through. I'm actually convinced that Deadpool is using comedy as a coping mechanism to deal with the horrible situation that he went through, and it would have made a lot of sense for him to do so. Ryan Reynolds did a fantastic job portraying Deadpool, and he was always a good choice for the character. After the failure of X-Men Origins Wolverine, I thought that Ryan Reynolds was going to reprise his role as Deadpool or have anything to do with the character. But it was Ryan Reynolds himself who actually pushed for this film, and I'm so happy that he did. I assume that Ryan Reynolds must have read the comics a lot because he really knows what kind of character Deadpool is, and it definitely shows in his performance of the character. Vanessa was a really interesting love interest to Wade. Sure, she didn't have much to do in this film other than being kidnapped, which I'll talk about later, but I loved her personality and her chemistry with Wade. Vanessa is shown to be slightly more mature than Wade, as she is not as wacky as Wade normally is. But she can be just as vulgar as Wade, especially during her and Wade's wacky sexual antics during the holidays of the year. I mentioned before that I really enjoy her relationship with Wade, as it's one of the most genuine relationships I've ever seen done in a superhero film. I like the fact that Vanessa still cared about Wade after he was diagnosed with cancer. The scene where Wade was diagnosed with cancer is easily one of the most heartbreaking scenes in the movie, as we see Wade becoming worried about whether or not he will live long enough to be with Vanessa. It shows how much Vanessa really cares about Wade and was willing to do whatever it takes to make sure that Wade will survive through this crisis. I also like the fact that Vanessa wasn't your average damsel in distress, as she will put up a good fight if her life is in danger. This was evidenced towards the end of the film when she remains defiant towards Ajax and even stabs him during his battle with Deadpool. But probably the character that I liked the most in this film was none other than Colossus himself. Colossus has always been one of my all-time favorite X-Men characters, and it was annoying about how the previous X-Men movies had portrayed him. I mean, if you thought that Deadpool himself was mistreated in X-Men Origins Wolverine, then that's nothing compared to how Colossus was treated in the previous X-Men films. At least in the case of Deadpool, he still had a voice and a personality, at least until he became Barakapool and for some bizarre reason had his mouth sewn shut. The Colossus in the previous X-Men films barely had anything to say, and he didn't really have much of a personality to speak of, that there were times where I didn't even notice that he existed. What is it with Fox's X-Men movies putting random characters in the background and not really doing anything with them? Anyway, ranting aside, when I first heard that Colossus of all characters was going to be cast in the Deadpool movie, I was literally scratching my head thinking about how that could possibly work out. As much as I love Colossus, I never would have expected him to be in a vulgar movie like this. I was expecting Wolverine to appear in this film, because aside from him being one of the most popular X-Men characters, especially in the movies, he seems to have the most in common with Deadpool. Both characters were thrown into the Weapon X program, where they were experimented on in order to become super soldiers, and they ended up gaining immense healing abilities as a result. They are both also anti-heroes, although in Deadpool's case, it depended on the writer, as they often have gruff personalities and would kill people if necessary. Oh, and by the way, both Deadpool and Wolverine had their own successful R-rated films. Deadpool had his own movie, while Wolverine has Logan. How ironic. Colossus, on the other hand, isn't an anti-hero, and he's much nicer and less violent than either Wolverine or Deadpool combined. Sure, any other X-Men character could have easily filled in Colossus' role as being a foil to Deadpool, like Kitty Pryde, or Storm, or Beast, or Cyclops, or Nightcrawler. But luckily, Colossus was chosen for this role. But when I started watching this film, Colossus' role in the film started to make more sense. Colossus is portrayed as a traditional superhero who is always trying to do the right thing, and is shown as being polite and optimistic. Colossus was very well portrayed in this film, as he is much closer to his comic book counterpart compared to his previous appearances. For one thing, he's actually Russian in this movie. I find it endearing that Colossus is also teaching a young X-Men student. In this case, it's Negasonic Teenage Warhead. Wow, that's a long name. Let's just call it Negasonic for the rest of this review. And it shows that Colossus cares about setting a good example for his students by training them into becoming heroes. I will admit that compared to the other characters in this film, Colossus sticks out like a sore thumb. A good majority of the characters in this movie are cynical and violent people, including Negasonic herself. Meanwhile, Colossus is probably the only straight-up hero in this movie, as he tries to be heroic throughout the story, and he doesn't take kindly to Deadpool using strong language. Colossus actually has an important role in this film, no matter how small his role is. He spends most of the movie trying to recruit Deadpool to become an X-Men, while also trying to show Deadpool that he can be a hero if he strives to do so. Colossus represents what Deadpool would be like if Deadpool wasn't an anti-hero and didn't kill people in an act of vengeance. Colossus seems to notice that there is some good in Deadpool, which is slightly evident in how Deadpool tries to rescue his girlfriend Vanessa from Ajax. Throughout the movie, Deadpool keeps on refusing Colossus' offer to join the X-Men, since he doesn't consider himself a hero, nor does he want to be a hero. However, during the big fight between him and Ajax, Deadpool becomes the hero when he saves Vanessa, although it only lasted for a brief moment. I always found Colossus to be quite a hilarious character because of how the other characters react to his Boy Scout nature. So, what would happen if you have a character who is constantly optimistic and polite living in the cynical world? In this case, everybody's reaction to Colossus' heroism was, "Huh? What? Are you kidding me? Do you really think that being a hero is going to work in this world?" And because of this, many people sort of get annoyed with Colossus' speeches about heroism, especially Deadpool himself. I was glad that the movie's narrative is part origin story and part present day story. The movie does start off with Deadpool fighting a bunch of goons on a highway, but it also cuts back to Wade Wilson's backstory about how he became Deadpool and how he met Vanessa. The movie's narrative was interesting to me, because with most superhero origin films that I've seen, they usually spend most of the movie developing the characters before they become their superhero personas. However, in this case, the movie starts off with Wade Wilson already becoming Deadpool, and then goes back and forth on telling us Wade's backstory while it's still taking place in the present. I like the fact that we actually have an origins movie for Deadpool, since as I stated before, unless you read the comics, most people didn't know anything about Deadpool's backstory. Even in the previous films featuring Deadpool like Hulk vs. Wolverine, and to a lesser extent X-Men Origins Wolverine, didn't really go into much detail about Deadpool's backstory. I was actually surprised that this movie managed to balance comedy and drama so well, even though the majority of this movie is a comedy. I actually cringed during the scenes where Wade was being experimented on, while also laughing out loud at his jokes and antics as Deadpool. It was interesting that Deadpool constantly breaks the fourth wall in this film, as he is always making jokes about other superhero movies that the other characters couldn't possibly know about. I especially love the pot shots that Deadpool takes at other superhero films, especially Green Lantern, the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and especially X-Men Origins Wolverine. One of my all-time favorite quotes in this film was when Colossus and Negasonic were taking Deadpool to the Xavier's Institute, and Deadpool asked, "McAvoy or Stewart, these timelines can get so confusing." It was interesting to me that this world is much more cynical than what you would expect to see in superhero films, despite this film being the funniest of the X-Men film franchise. Everyone in this world seems so vulgar and cynical, and it seems like no one in this world believes in the optimism of superheroes. Now, I can understand Wade being cynical, especially with all the terrible things that's happened to him, but the other people in the city? What reasons do they have for being cynical? Anyway, it makes me wonder if there are any other superheroes in this universe. Well, you got the X-Men, but they're not treated any better. This film seems like it's deconstructing everything we know about superhero movies. For one thing, what we see in most superhero movies is that the superheroes themselves are respected by the public. In this film, however, the superheroes in question, Colossus and Negasonic, are constantly disrespected by Deadpool and Ajax's goons. Well, fair enough, since Deadpool is an anti-hero who has no desire to be a hero, and Ajax and his goons are the bad guys. So we never get to see how a non-villainous character in this universe would react to Colossus and Negasonic's acts of heroism. Now, I like to talk about some of the issues that I had with this film. For one thing, even though I think that this film treated secondary characters way better than the previous X-Men films did, I still think that they could have given more attention to the secondary characters. I had mentioned before that while Vanessa was a much more proactive character as a love interest, I still think that they could have given her more scenes. I would have liked more scenes of her trying to search for Wade after he disappeared, or see more of how she's dealing with his disappearance. It would have brought more depth to her character, and even show her being more proactive to the plot of the story by taking the situation to her own hands and finding Wade herself. I do like the fact that she was the one who stabs Ajax at the end of the movie, since it shows that she can take care of herself when the situation calls for it, and I would have liked to see more scenes of her defending herself against any danger. And as much as I love the fact that this movie was faithful to Colossus' character and actually gave him more to do in this film, I still think that there was a lot more to his character that we aren't getting. Like, for one thing, how long has Colossus known Deadpool, and why is he so determined to get Deadpool to join the X-Men? Is Colossus just trying to take in another misguided mutant to train to become an X-Men? Or does he see that Deadpool just needs a better direction in his life? I mean, Deadpool has stated numerous times to Colossus that he doesn't want to join the X-Men, and I don't see why he should join the X-Men if he isn't interested. And then probably the most problematic thing for me in this movie was the ending. So basically, Deadpool finally defeats Ajax, the one who transformed Wade's body to a monstrosity. And when Ajax tells Deadpool that he can't cure him, Deadpool decides to shoot Ajax in the head, despite Colossus trying desperately to convince Deadpool to not kill Ajax. Deadpool finally reunites with Vanessa accepting Wade's monstrous look, and the end. That's how the movie ends. Now, I have a few issues with this ending. For one thing, the ending felt a bit too abrupt. It's like Deadpool finally encompasses his goal of getting back together with Vanessa and taking down the guy who's disfigured him, and the movie just ends right there. We don't see the consequences that Wade might face with his actions throughout the movie, which leads me to another issue that I had with this ending. So basically, Deadpool had just committed countless crimes throughout the film by killing lots of people, even if they were mostly the bad guys. And yet Colossus and Negasonic just let him go? Shouldn't they have, like, I don't know, taken him to the police or taken back with them to the Institute like they were originally going to do? It just seems so weird to me that Colossus and Negasonic would let him go after all the carnage that he caused. That's the funny thing about superhero movies sometimes. Every time a superhero or villain causes massive damage to a city, the citizens or the heroes and villains themselves just turn a blind eye to it. Although there were some superhero movies that actually tried to tackle that subject from time to time. Now, there is a sequel to this movie that had just been released called, of course, Deadpool 2, and as of this video, I haven't seen the sequel yet. I wanted to review this movie first before I tackle the sequel. But now that I finally reviewed this movie, it's time for me to grab my popcorn and a bottle of Sprite and start watching that sequel. Deadpool is rated R for strong violence and language throughout, sexual content, and graphic nudity. Yep, this movie has the entire R rating package and then some. However, in this case, it actually made a lot of sense for this movie to get an R rating. Deadpool has always been an edgy character in the comics, and the movie was only trying to stay true to Deadpool's roots by having an R rating. Also, even though there is a lot of violence and language in this film, it never felt forced to me, and it seemed very natural for the characters living in this cynical world. Even though I never was a huge fan of nudity in any film, I was surprised that the nudity in this film was kept in a minimal. There were only 2 scenes that featured nudity, and that was the sex scenes between Wade and Vanessa, and a scene where they went to a strip club, which surprisingly, the late Stan Lee made a cameo in. Overall, I give Deadpool a score of... Chimichanga! Wait, what? Who said that? Anyway, I give Deadpool a score of a 9.5 out of 10. Sure, the movie could have done a better job at developing the secondary characters, and the ending felt a bit rushed, but this was one of the best superheroes, sort of, films I have ever seen. The film did a fantastic job at staying true to the roots of the characters, especially Deadpool and Colossus. It also did a great job at balancing the comedic and dramatic scenes without making any of them seem too out of place. The violence and strong language littered throughout the film was actually very natural for this film. And the fact that this film actually helped inspire more R-rated superhero properties to come in the future is a testament to how influential this movie is to the superhero market. Hope you enjoyed my review of Deadpool. Psst. Hey you. Have you been enjoying the Reviews 2.0 videos? Want to get an added bonus for viewing these videos? Like getting early access to these videos before they are released on YouTube? Or being able to request what movies and TV shows I should review next? Then please feel free to support these videos through my Patreon account. Check out all of the tier titles on my account and choose which tier title you want to be known as. You could become a new member on the block, an early bird, be a part of the future Bunch team, a backstage passenger, an animation superstar, and last but not least, the honorary supreme. So show off your tier title name to the world once you support the Reviews 2.0 videos through Patreon. Hey guys, like this video? Then please feel free to hit that like button. And also, hit that subscribe button for more content about video games, movies, and TV shows from this channel. And now, let's roll the credits, please! Chimichanga! Raw!